Welcome to the Leadership Inspiration Series hosted by Vicki Haddock of Transcending Limits. Well, good morning. I am here with Rico Maranto, and we're going to be talking about leadership today, and specifically about how to develop your vision, mission, and values if you've never done that before as a company. But welcome, Rico. And I just love to let you give a little bit of background about yourself and your experience.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So right now I'm with a company called People Core. We primarily specialize in leadership development and training material development. I'm a senior consultant with them, and I've been doing this kind of work for almost 30 years now. I started out training in the Air Force, training firefighters, and kind of worked into the computer industry, then the oil and gas industry, the waste industry, and have always had a passion for leadership development. And what I love about leadership development is that it just touches so many aspects of our lives. You know, we think about people having training because it helps them to be better employees, but the way I see leadership development is it really helps people be better husbands and wives, better parents, better members of the community, and also better employees. And so I've been doing this for, like I said, 30 years. I've written a chapter in a couple of leadership books, and I've also written a book that I'm working on publishing. And so it's just truly a passion of mine. And I'm excited about the opportunity to talk a little bit about those things with you today, Vicki.
That's awesome. And we're excited to get your expertise of all of that experience. And I'm really picked up on one thing that you said in there is that leadership makes us better people. And that's just fascinating for me, because one of my philosophies is if we make better people or help people become better, it betters our teams, betters our companies, betters our profits and our outcomes in the end. So is that part of how you see leadership playing a role?
Absolutely. As we better ourselves and become better people, we become better for everyone we're engaged with, whether it's at home or in the community or at work. Very true.
Yeah, that's awesome, because that old adage of leave home at home, and that doesn't really work. People are human, and they're always, that home always comes to work with them, and vice versa. So if we can teach them, grow them, and how to manage life better, awesome thing. So
Absolutely.
let's dive in. If you were going to work with leading at either a business that's never had looked at these things before, or a new business, in helping guide them to put together some foundational principles on leadership and vision, mission, values, where would you start?
Well, I think the first thing we would start with is to figure out what good does the company do in the world. Um, all too often, when companies create the vision, the mission, and the values, the vision and the mission particularly tend to be more about the company than anything else. And we talk about creating a compelling vision, creating a compelling mission statement. And all too often, the companies create this amazing mission statement that they put a lot of work into. They print on all their posters, they put on their company website, they share it with all the employees, and they really don't get a lot of traction out of it for whatever reason. And something that I found that I think really differentiates the compelling vision statements and missions from the less compelling vision statements and missions is really, what good does the company do in the world? Because what happens sometimes is companies create a vision all about the company. We want to be the best at, we want to be the premier at, we want to be the number one at. And that's more about the success of the company and really the success of the CEO. And so in essence, the vision becomes more self-serving than serving. But the companies that have truly compelling visions are those who make people better and make the world better. And so I actually gathered a few. Would it be okay if I shared a few examples of some
Oh,
of those kind of visions?
absolutely. Yeah, I'd love that.
All right, so visions, Disney's vision is to make people happy. IKEA is to create a better everyday life for the many people in the world. Microsoft, empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Ford, people working together as a lean global enterprise to make people's lives better through automotive and mobility leadership. And Tesla, to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. What's cool about those visions is those visions aren't about the company. They're about making people better, making the world better. And those are the kind of visions that employees and communities and customers and shareholders, those are the kind of the visions that they buy into. And when they buy into that vision, the good we're doing in the world, then they start putting their effort into the success of the company and buying the company's products. So that's the first thing I start with is what is really the overall and overreaching purpose of the company, and how does it make the world better? How does it make people better?
It's very interesting because I think there's two very different perspectives to come from there. There was nothing about profits, nothing about um, corporate earnings per share
That's
or
right.
anything in those. So the one perspective that you're saying that is not as successful is when the company is just focused on the self-serving of generating income or profits for them, but when they're focused on a serving aspect of what they actually do and bring to the world.
That's right. And that's a vision people buy into. And when they buy into the purpose, then they put their efforts and energies to the success of the company. And what's interesting, and especially with millennials, and also the up and coming generation after the millennials, is when they're surveyed, what do you want most from their job? They most often talk about purpose and meaning. And those kind of visions create the kind of places that the younger generations would want to work for.
Interesting. So it's a great time for companies to be reevaluating how they're showing up in the world.
Absolutely.
If someone is listening to this and they're looking at their mission statement and realizing that it's not so motivating to their employees, how would you suggest they begin to look at it to shift it?
Well, I think the key is again exploring our purpose. Is our purpose just to make money for the company and for the shareholders? And if that's the purpose, it's going to be hard to craft that vision. And so we have to reevaluate the purpose and really figure out what is the real benefit we add to the world, and how do we rewrite that vision? How do we rewrite that mission statement to focus on that benefit? And sometimes it causes a change in thinking. The leadership has to think beyond how do I bring value to the shareholders and therefore the company and therefore me, to how do I bring value to the people I lead and the communities we work in and the world at large. And so it's a significant change in perspective.
That is, and I hear what you're saying there, and I think that also goes down to believing that the people that are working for you are your assets versus your liabilities. And I've known that those two very different perspectives as well. And when you can embrace people as your assets and that they have the potential to help create something great, it supports that perspective.
And that's so true. And I love it when companies go beyond the idea that employees are assets. Well, I heard one company say that we don't call our employees our number one resource. Because we recognize the employees are the company. And so when we look at it from that perspective and realize the only reason the organization exists is because of the great people we have working with us to the common goal, that's when we begin to realize how important the people we lead are.
Yeah, that's so true. If all the employees walked out one day, there's no business, right?
Absolutely.
So if a company's gone through really crafting their mission statement, so it's a serving mission statement, where do they go from there?
Well, I think the self-serving nature in us, and it's natural for us to have that self-serving instinct, because from birth, we were born with that innate ability to survive. And then what's worse is our parents make it worse for us. I mean, every time we cry, they come running. Every time we need diaper change, they come running. Every time we want to eat, they come running. And so we get to this place in our life where we just believe that the entire world and everything we know about the world exists to make our life better. And then as we mature, we spend the rest of our lives working against that internal program as well as the external programming that happens. And so I think, to answer your question, it's really pushing against that. How will this make me look? How do I create a vision that makes me look good because the company looks good too? How do I create a vision that makes those around us look good and make the world even better?
Wow, again, embracing that shift in perspective of serving others versus self-serving.
Absolutely. It's all about recognizing that the leaders are, in fact, the best leaders are servants. The best leaders want what's best for those they lead. And, Stephen M. R. Covey said something that was powerful about trust. And when we hear leaders are struggling, all too often it's founded in trust. And what Stephen M. R. Covey said is, he said, people that you lead need to know two things about you to know that they can trust you. Number one, they need to know that you are not a threat. And number two, they need to know that your only intention and your only desire is to help them succeed. And so when our vision statement is all about my success as the CEO, the success of the company that I'm leading, it is self-serving. It comes across as your whole intent is to make you look good. But when your vision statement is about making the people successful, making the people look good, making the world a better place, then you begin to shift that perspective from appearing like the self-serving leader to be more of a serving leader.
Wow, again, following that whole shift in perspective through. I want to come back to that when we're done with talking about values. I want to come back to this difference between a servant leadership, or what I would call a heart-centered leadership culture, versus not, because there's a whole lot to talk about there. But let's talk the next step, because I know that you're very passionate about, once the mission and the vision is developed, that the values are important, and how those values are even put together are super important. So tell us more about that.
You bet. I'm glad you asked. So values are truly important. And again, it's one of those things that every leader knows they need to have in their company. All the leaders, create values. Maybe they create them on their own. Maybe they have a team. Maybe they have the employees come up with the values. And again, they print them on the posters. They put them on the website. They train their employees on it. They put it in the materials and all of those things. And in some companies, they truly take hold and become part of the company. And other companies, they just become words on a poster and are rarely thought about again. And so I think the key to creating values that become meaningful and shape the culture really begins in how you create those values. No matter how good your packaging is, no matter how good your training is, no matter how good your kickoff is, if you don't start in the right place, the values won't have a lot of value, not to use a pun there. But what I find is the best values are those that are created through the decision-making process. And so at its basic level, if a leader simply thinks through, when I make a decision, what things do I consider when I make that decision? For instance, let's say that an employee wants to change a standard operating procedure or a policy. And you want to think through, well, what would I do to approve that standard operating procedure change or approve that new policy? And whatever you think through, those become, in essence, your personal values. And then the CEO is really, the personality of the CEO creates the personality of the company. The culture of the company stems from the internal personality of the CEO. And if those values that the CEO holds close and uses to make decisions become the values of the company, and then he trains them how to make decisions, them being the employees and the other leaders, how to make decisions following those values, then the values become a core of the company. They become a core of the culture, and they become part of the thinking process, which then takes them from just a list on a poster to something that's meaningful and impacts the culture. So just to summarize, I think I said a lot there, but really the values need to be the decision-making process. What things do the leaders want everyone to consider when they make a decision? And I think Disney has really set the standard for that. May I share? Would it be okay if I shared Disney's 4 keys?
Yeah, let's learn of that. And maybe you can explain to us, as you're sharing those, what you mean by the decision-making process, and how maybe an employee at the front line at Disney might be able to embrace the values.
You bet. Be happy to. So Disney's 4 keys at their theme parks are safety, courtesy, show, and efficiency. And so what they teach their employees is whenever you're making a decision, and this goes to your question about the decision tree, whenever you're making a decision, you go right to the 4 keys. You first consider, well, is this the safe thing to do? And if it's not safe, the decision is made. There is no other factor to consider. Well, if it is a safe decision, then they consider courtesy. Is this the way to take care of our customers? Does this create a good environment for our customers and put a smile on their face consistent with making people happy, the vision of Disney? And then they consider show. Is this what creates the magic in Disney? And then they consider efficiency. And so the order of those values is paramount, because it's the order of the values that create the decision tree. First, consider safety, and then consider courtesy, and you work your way through those 4 keys to make your decisions. And that's what creates the culture. It's based on that decision-making tree founded in prioritized values.
That's interesting that you use Disney, because I'm just, as you were listing those, I was thinking, like, what a different experience Disney would be if efficiency was the #1 value instead of safety or courtesy in there, what a much different experience it would be and how much that's contributed to their success.
That's such a great insight because they certainly wouldn't have the success that they do. I love that you talked about efficiency first because that's what a lot of companies will put first is productivity, efficiency, process, and profitability. All of those things sometimes take the hierarchy. And when they do, then performance declines because people are no longer invested in something that is meaningful. And the focus shifts to something that is more self-serving than serving. And people lose sight of that higher purpose that gives them meaning and causes them to be motivated about the work they do.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And I'll use some of my own experiences in my years in the waste industry. When productivity becomes the focus, your accidents are going to go up because all of a sudden people are pushing to get done. They're pushing to hurry their day, and their attention around those safety issues lessen. And so, great example. The other thing I love about what you've talked about is it gives a duplicatable way to explain the values to every single employee, from a manager to a supervisor to a frontline employee can use that decision tree to make to arrive at the exact same decisions.
Absolutely. It does make it easy to cascade the idea of using those values through the organization. And what you hit upon, I think, was the key, is that it creates consistency in decision making. And what that leads to is real empowerment, because empowerment really is freedom within boundaries. And the values then create the boundaries that the employees can work within. And as long as they're following that decision tree, you know that their decision making, for the most part, will be aligned with your own. And then you can trust them to have more autonomy because they'll be making decisions the way you would make those decisions. And what some companies do on the alternative, just so you can see the other side of that coin, is in trying to ensure employees make the right decisions in the absence of the decision-making tree based on the values, they create policies and procedures. And so what some companies do is they become heavily policy and procedure driven, which unfortunately policies and procedures paralyze more than empower. And so if we're not careful, sometimes the intent can be lost in the policies and procedures because the employees will feel trapped. If there's not a policy, if there's not a procedure to tell you exactly how to do what needs to be done, they'll be paralyzed. They won't know what to do. Or worse, they may be led to do something that could be unsafe, that could be the least effective way to do it because that's what the policy says. But on the other hand, when you empower with values, you don't need as many policies and procedures because you know they will make the decisions in the right way, considering the right criteria, and therefore it's less likely then to guide them with policy and procedure.
Wow, what a great point. And I know for myself that the last thing an employee wants is to be told that we're doing this because a policy says so.
Absolutely.
It just doesn't ring and sit well with them. And it feels like a cop out and somebody not taking responsibility. So the flip side of that, I love how you're pointing out when there is that solid ability to evaluate decisions that's common to everybody, then we don't need to rely on policies and procedures.
That's right.
Fantastic. So if a company has been going down the culture path a little bit wrong and they're seeing in their results that something needs to shift in the culture, what's it like to steer that ship and get it to change course? Because company culture can be like a gigantic ship in the ocean that it takes a little bit to get it turned around.
That's so true. It is turning a big ship, but the cool thing about big ships is they're actually turned by very small. Now I'm forgetting the rudder. Perhaps I can't. There's a bigger word for it, I think. But they're turned by very small things, and turning a culture is exactly the same way. It's small and simple things that move that culture. And so it's creating that vision, creating that mission, creating that values, and then holding everyone to those values. The values create the boundaries and expectations for the culture and then lead to the personality of the company. And so when everyone's working from the same music, you start to see that culture change. It can take years to get to where you want to be in your culture. But the steps are actually well defined and they're actually pretty simple as long as you do them in the right way for the right reasons.
So because of that, and I hear you say the steps. So if somebody's doing that, creating a culture change, is it important for them to have maybe some outside guidance in doing that?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I once watched a YouTube video on how to fix my brakes because I'm kind of cheap. I just I don't like to spend money when I don't have to, and so I learned how to fix my own brakes, how to change the brake pads and everything, and I got to where I was pretty good at it. I could fix my own brakes pretty well, and one day I had this squeak in my brakes that I couldn't work out. And so I took it to the mechanic, and the mechanic looked at it for a day or two and then called me up and said, Mr. Maranto, we looked at your brakes and you definitely have some problems that we need to resolve. But I just wanted to talk to you about one thing. I don't know who you've been taking your brakes to, but I would suggest you not take it back to those people. and so, and so the way we see it is, it's I'm not a mechanic. And even though I've read books on how to fix a car, watched a YouTube video on how to fix a car, even had education on how to fix cars, I'm still not a mechanic. And in the same way, there are a lot of CEOs who are brilliant at what they do, but they may not be experts at culture change. And so sometimes it's better to call on the experts, and that will typically save you time, effort, and money as you seek to change that culture. They can give you the next steps. They can identify and take the temperature of the culture in a way that someone inside the organization really can't. It's a matter of seeing the trees for the forest, and consultants have that ability. And they can also bring to bear all the tools and resources and skills that they have to help shift that culture.
That's amazing. Very great advice. And then I just want to wrap up with circling back to our conversation about the difference between a servant leadership led or heart center led culture versus something that's not. So tell me a little bit about the perspective differences there.
All right, well, let's talk about first the traditional style of leadership. There has, and it stems from a great place. I mean, we look back at the greatest American heroes of World War II, and we look at Patton and MacArthur, and we look at those leaders and how they led, and they were marvelous leaders in that context and in that environment. And what happened is that style of leadership, that top-down, hierarchical, autocratic leadership style, do this right now, kind of worked its way into the workplace. And so for decades, centuries perhaps, we've had that kind of autocratic leadership, a mindset where I'm the boss and you do what I say, or you're fired, or you want to stay, keep working here. And that's kind of the traditional approach. And the heart-centered approach, as you talked about, the servant approach that is gaining momentum as we move into a new evolution of how we lead, is the approach of really loving the people you lead enough to hold them accountable. That to me is what servant leadership is. It's leading in a way that your entire perspective is the success of those that you lead. And what we find, and we have many examples, WD-40, Southwest Airlines, there are a number of examples of companies that have been tremendously successful. In fact, the data shows that companies who adopt this mindset of servant leadership tend to outperform the S&P sometimes 4 times. The S&P.
Powerful. Wow. So it contributes to real numbers and profits.
It certainly does, because what happens is when people feel they're in an environment where their supervisor, their leaders, their CEO have their best interests at heart, they have what's called that circle of safety that Simon Sinek talks about. And in that circle of safety, they no longer have to defend themselves against the people they work for. They can turn all of their attention and energies to the success of the organization. And so servant leadership is, again, caring enough about your people to hold them accountable for their success. And as you do, then the organization succeeds.
What is also, again, a shift in perspective. I feel like everything that we've talked about today, there is what we might say the more traditional way to view things, and then this more powerful, open-minded perspective that really is empowering at the end of the day.
Absolutely. It's all about empowering the people you lead so that they are free to use all of their creativity, all of their talents, all of their energies for the good of the team and the good of the organization. And leadership that engages people in that way, that puts people in an environment where they feel trusted, they feel secure, Those kinds of environments are the ones that get the most out of the people who work in them.
Well, thank you so much, Rico, for being here today. It's been a fantastic conversation. And as we wrap up, any parting words of wisdom on leadership for our audience?
I think I just want to reiterate what we talked about thus far is the importance of being the kind of leader that puts people and the good of others and the good of the world first. And when you are that kind of leader, then people trust you, people follow you, and people will believe in your vision. And so I think that's the key is it's not about me, it's about them. And if we can always remember that, then we'll be the kind of leaders people want us to be.
The word that comes to my mind as I listen to you say that is authentic leadership. And I think there is a shift in our world towards more authenticity, less. I focus a lot on the marketing world right now and less gimmicks, less things happening, but being more authentic and genuine. So thank you for that reminder for us to just check in with what's our purpose? Are we here to serve and bring our light and wisdom to the world around, or are we not? So
very true.
Thank you for taking the time to be here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.